And good afternoon, Pittsburgh Steelers fans. Welcome to another edition of Steelers Brunch with Tony. I am your host, Tony Defeo, and thank you as always for joining me on this nice and mild Saturday afternoon. So, as always, I want to encourage you to subscribe and like our Behind the Steel Curtain YouTube channel, where we bring you at least one podcast each and every day. We have The Standard is the Standard. We have a new show called Beck and Black, hosted by Michael Beck and Jeffrey Benedict. We have the Steelers Preview. We have the Big Bro Sco Show. We have, the Steelers Q&A, hosted by yours truly and Brian Anthony Davis every Monday at 5 p.m. And we have a new show that I'm really excited about that we've been doing. Now it's moved to Tuesday morning. That's strictly audio, and that's the Steelers Retro Show. Check that out. And then in the regular season, the Steelers Q&A changes over to the Steelers Hangover, where we discuss the previous day's Steelers game. So please check all those podcasts out. And, of course, check out Behind the Steel Curtain, the website, where we bring you plenty of articles each and every day. There's obviously the breaking news. There's commentary, film breakdown by guys like Jeffrey Benedict and Cliff Harris is still a punk. They do a really great job. There's a salary cap information that's always key to the Steelers each and every year. So please check that out. So just wanted to say hi to everybody in the live chat before I get started. There's Ezra, there's Dave Shipley, Ryan O'Toole, Steelers Pittsburgh, all familiar faces. So thank you for joining me as always. And as always, I wanted to Kathy Ford in the live chat. There's Bry, who is I think he's a new guy, or a new fan, but I'm not sure. I think I've seen him on Mondays. Either way, thank you for joining me, Bry. And as always, I wanted to touch on a few topics. That's kind of been my thing this off season. Excuse me while I go over my notes. But the first thing I want to talk about is the fact that the Steelers, as the title suggests, the Steelers don't necessarily need home field advantage for the playoffs this year. I mean, it's always nice. It's always nice to have the highest seed possible when you go into the playoffs. So obviously, the number one goal for the Steelers in 2020 is to make the playoffs after missing them the last 2 years. But, we are Steeler fans, and this is Steeler Nation. We do have high expectations. So you want that number one seed. You want the division. You want all the things that make getting to the Super Bowl easier, right? So in a normal year, yeah, you want that top seed, especially in 2020 and beyond, with there only being one bye in each conference now, thanks to the addition of a seventh seed in each conference. Only the top seed gets a bye. The number two seed doesn't get a bye any longer. So, of course, you're going to want that number one seed. That's a very valuable. It's become an even more valuable commodity, the number one seed, even more than in previous years. But what mattered that much this year? Because the reason why I ask is I'm not so sure that there are going to be fans in the stands at all in 2020. We've some teams like the Cowboys owner Jerry Jones, he has indicated that he would like to see fans in the stands at the Cowboys home games this year. Other teams have not. The Washington football team has already said that it will not have fans in the stands during the regular season. So my feeling about that is, if during the season is one thing, if there are fans allowed to attend games, even if it's only 15, 20,000, whatever it happens to be, during the regular season, I doubt the NFL will allow any fans at all in the postseason, simply because it could create a competitive imbalance, right? I mean, why should some teams be allowed to have home fans at their playoff games while other teams won't be allowed to have that? So, and that's why I think that this year, the Steelers don't really necessarily need home field advantage. Again, it would be nice if they had that top seed, but anything short of that, is it really going to matter? travel is a big deal, and nobody likes to travel. I mean, if anybody who's had to travel for work would tell you it sucks, right? It's just not. It's not a. It's not an attractive thing. Excuse me while just some things I wanted to really touch on here. Here we are. Now I'm up to speed. Anyway, nobody likes to travel, and of course, going onto your time zone also isn't good, especially for your internal clock. I know a few years ago I went to Chicago, which is an hour behind Pittsburgh as far as the time, and that was hard to get used to for me. Obviously, as you can tell, I don't travel a lot, but so yeah, stuff like that is a big deal. But overall, from what I've studied over the years, I read a book called Scorecasting several years ago, and it was really interesting, about how some things are the way they are in sports. And one of the most interesting things that I discovered by reading this book, according to the people who did the research for this book, is that the biggest factor for home field advantage in sports, and if you notice, home field advantage is a big deal all throughout sports, whether it's college, pro, hockey, the NFL, NBA, Major League Baseball. Being at home, the home teams win the vast majority of their games, at least the majority of their games. Roughly 60% in most cases. And why is that? A lot of people automatically assume it's because of traveling. It's because of the time zone factor. A lot of people think it's because of the fans influencing the home team and rallying behind the home team and intimidating the road team, making a bunch of noise. And that all that stuff does factor in. Travel, the crowd supporting the fans, being at home. If you're the home team, being comfortable in your surroundings, that's all a big deal. But from what I've researched, the biggest factor seems to be official bias, in-game officials. And not necessarily because they want to be biased, because they want some team to win. It appears to be an unconscious thing. In this book, they cited a study that was done. I don't even know if it was tied to this particular topic, but a study on the power of persuasion, the power of influence, and they did this test. I'm paraphrasing the study because I read this book like 5-6 years ago, but the gist of it is they put 10 people in a room, right, and 9 of those people were actors, and 1 was the research study, and they held up a picture of like a green square. And they went around to the 9 actors first, and they said, "What do you see?" And they all, instead of saying green square, they all said orange rectangle. So when they got to the 10th person, who wasn't the actor, who was the actual research study, they were like, they thought they saw a green square, but they were influenced by all these other people, all these actors who said orange rectangle. So that's what they went with. It was that kind of study. So. It's a pretty good example of the power of suggestion, the power of persuasion, seeing something that's not quite there, being influenced by the group, by groupthink, right? That kind of thing. So they determined in this book that that's the biggest factor in why home teams do so well in sports. I mean, look at baseball teams, even like a 100-loss baseball team that barely wins 20 games on the road. Somehow manages to play at 500 or better at home. Why is that? According to this book, turnovers were overwhelmingly in the favor of the home team for many years, up until like the mid 80s, when instant replay reviews became a thing. These officials were sort of being judged by the eye in the sky, and if prior to that, if like a running back who was playing for the home team fumbled, but it was close, they would almost always go with he was down by contact. And if it was a visiting player that fumbled and it was close, they would almost always roll it a fumble. So those are the kind of things. So if the Steelers say, like Brian pointed out on Monday during the Steelers Q&A podcast, because there will be no fans in the stands, or there likely won't be fans in the stands during the regular season, it's going to cut down on parity, right? There won't be as many 8-8, 9-7, 7-9 teams. There'll be more 12-4, 13-3, 14-2. Those there might be more of those teams. So if there are more of those kind of teams, teams with those kind of records, that means that the Steelers, even if they win 11 or 12 games, they still might lose out in the AFC North, and they might have to settle for one of the 3 wild cards now, because it's 7 seeds now instead of 6. So they might have to settle for 5, 6, 7 seed. And in past years that would be a horrible disadvantage. We saw that in 2011 when the Steelers finished 12-4, but lost out on the AFC North title and the number 2 seed, which would have come with the bye, that year. They lost out on that on a tiebreaker, and they were the 5th seed, and they had to go play in Denver against the 8-8 Broncos, and that game went into overtime. And of course, Tim Tebow took them to school that day, threw for 316 yards, and it was one of the most depressing losses in recent memory. But if that game was played in front of 0 fans, what would the outcome have been different? Perhaps, right? I mean, Dick LeBeau's defensive schemes have been called into question for that game. I mean, for whatever reason, he played almost like 0 coverage or cover 1 or whatever. I'm not an expert in that kind of thing, but he played a lot of man-to-man against Tim Tebow because he was worried about the run, instead of trying to maybe confuse him with some zone coverages like he did to Joe Flacco in his rookie year in the AFC Championship game in 2008. So that was obviously a factor, but if they were playing in front of 0 fans, would that have given the Steelers at least an even advantage, an even playing field, as far as there wouldn't have been perhaps any official bias or unconscious bias by the officials in that game. So I guess the bottom line for the Steelers heading into the regular season is to establish an identity on offense, establish an identity on defense, right? And stay healthy when they throughout the regular season, and head into the playoffs on a bit of a roll with some momentum. And obviously you want to get the highest seed possible. Again, you want to try to win the AFC North. You want to try to get the top seed if possible. But anything short of that, it's probably not going to matter all that much in terms of whether you play at home or on the road. It just probably won't matter that much this year. So I think that's the first topic I wanted to cover. Is that I think it's a fascinating thing. I think it's the home team's not going to be able to rely on emotion. I mean, that's another thing I think that factors into NFL games, is especially a team that's kind of the underdog playing at home, and we see that a lot in the wild card round, where a team with an inferior record is kind of maybe has the crowd behind it, and it plays with more passion, as opposed to maybe if it's a neutral site and there's no fans in the stands, it won't be as easily. It won't be as hyped up for the game, and it won't be it won't have as much of an advantage. So that's the first topic I wanted to cover. The second topic I wanted to cover is fans moving on from recent draft picks so easily. And I don't know why that is, but I'm seeing that this offseason with guys like James Washington, who was a second round pick in 2018 out of Oklahoma State. People were really excited about him coming out of the draft that year. And of course, he had a very disappointing rookie year. I mean, the thing he was most famous for that year was diving to catch a pass from Ben Roethlisberger in Denver, where if he would have just stayed on his feet, he probably would have caught it and took it in for a touchdown. So that was his most famous play from that year. He had 16 receptions for 217 yards, but he rebounded in a big way last year, I think. I've said this several times. He caught 44 passes for 735 yards. He led the team in receiving, but fans, it seemed like, have already quickly moved on from him. And, I guess in Washington's case, it's understandable. They've drafted so many receivers at the top of the draft in recent years. Obviously, Juju in 2017, and he's a star. He's one of the stars of the team now. He's one of the faces of the league, actually. I mean, he had a down year last year, but he's still a Pittsburgh superstar. And of course, Deontay Johnson, who they picked in the third round last year, he had such a great rookie campaign, 45 catches, I think, for 680 yards. And people were expecting big things from him heading into his second year. He's a budding superstar. A lot of people think he's going to be the number one guy before long. And of course, Chase Claypool is the shiny new toy, right? He's the big stud out of Notre Dame, who they picked in the second round in the most recent draft. So people are their expectations of him are pretty high right now. So somebody had to get lost in the shuffle, I guess. And James Washington, he's quiet, he's unassuming, he's not really on social media all that much. He doesn't talk a lot to reporters, I guess, or when he does, he doesn't really say anything controversial, or he doesn't really hype himself up all that much. So maybe that explains partly why he, why he's kind of lost in the shuffle. But a lot of people are already, it seems like they're already kind of writing him off a little bit, and I'm not sure why. I'm not much of an expert, as I always say, on the XYZ. I do know that Washington seems to be best suited for that outside receiver role, the go routes, the post patterns, that kind of thing. Whereas somebody like Juju's, as Jeffrey Benedict pointed out in a great article the other day, he's really good in the slot. And as I've said, Deontay Johnson seems like he's heading towards that number one receiver role, and a lot of people, according to a lot of people, I'm not so sure about that. I don't know. All I know is when they're in 11 personnel, and you can tell I looked this up before the show, 11 personnel, that's if I'm not mistaken, that's a 3 receiver set. So I guess Juju would be in the slot, and Washington would be on the outside, and Deontay Johnson would be the X. I don't know. I'm not really, like I said, I'm not an X and O. I always say I'm not X's and O's, and that's for a reason, because I don't understand this stuff all that well. But I do know a talented player when I see it, and I do know that Washington's fast. He's physical. He can make the combat catch, and again, he did really well last year, in a year when not too many people in the Steelers offense shined. I mean, I think his best game was that second Cleveland game at Heinz Field late in the year, when he made 3 really tough catches, including a touchdown catch when he was interfered with blatantly. I think that game showed off his abilities more than any game that he's played as a Steeler. Even the one in Cincinnati where he caught that pass from Devlin Hodges and stiff-armed the defensive back and took it in for a 75-yard touchdown, whatever it happened to be. I think that game against the Browns really showed what James Washington can do. And I think it'd be a very, very big mistake to write him off, because I think he's going to be an important member of that. Not that he's going to get cut. I don't think anybody's saying he's going to get cut. Obviously, he's not going to get cut. His job is safe. But I think people are already putting him in the background behind Juju and Johnson and Claypool. But I think he's going to be a pretty big and important member of that receiving corps starting this year, and certainly by his 4th year, which would be 2021. Because I don't think, as I've said many times, if I had to bet whatever little money I have on it, I would say that Juju's not coming back next year, because he's probably going to have a bounce back year with Ben under center. I don't know if he's going to get 111 catches for 1,400 yards again, but I look for him to have somewhere between his rookie year, when he had 59 catches or 58 catches, and what he did in 2018. If he's 85 catches for around 1,000 yards, which is what I expect him to do this year, I see no way that he comes back next year. Because first of all, I don't think they're going to franchise tag him. Why would they? They have all these young receivers. And second of all, they're not going to want. I don't think they're going to, because they have all these young receivers. They're not going to want to pay him number one receiver money, which, as I've said in the past, is considerable. And third of all, they have to deal with a shrinking salary cap. Whether it's $175 million or not next year. Whether that's the minimum cap or not, I don't know. But it's probably not going to be 198, and certainly not going to be 210 million, which was the projection before COVID-19 really started messing with everybody's revenue. So I doubt Juju's going to be back next year. So you're probably, if you're the Steelers, you're probably going to be relying on a guy like James Washington, who, if he is the kind, if he keeps on progressing the way I think he can, after based on his second year, is probably going to be ready to bust out by 2021, if not by 2020. So I think he's a somebody that we should not just be so quick to dismiss, simply because the Steelers have all these other receivers on the roster, because, as they say in that one commercial, life comes at you fast, right? And before long, the Steelers might be relying on James Washington to be their one of their primary weapons in the passing game. So those are I have more of that topic I wanted to touch on, but that's we'll say that for the second half of Steelers Brunch with Tony. And I encourage you, if you're listening on a podcasting platform, to stick around and download part 2, which will be coming up shortly. So thank you for joining me in part 1, and please stick around for part 2, which will be in 3, 2, and we're back. Welcome back, everybody. Welcome back to part 2 of Steelers Brunch with Tony. I thank you for joining me once again. I see so many people have stuck around, thankfully, because I have a lot more I wanted to talk about. There's Bry, Ezra, Dave Shipley. They're all still around. They all stuck by me. Thank you. These are the dog days of summer, and these are the dog days of training camp. We're literally 2 days away from the Steelers finally having padded practices. So I think we're all pretty excited about that, and finally getting to hear, even if we don't get to see it in person, finally getting to hear what these guys are capable of doing when they start actually scrimmaging and actually playing football, even if it's just in a training camp. So we're looking forward to that on Monday. So I want to continue on that topic I left off on in the first half, and that's the first half of the show, and that's people moving on quickly from recent draft picks. And I guess maybe the best example of that this year is Jalen Samuels, the 5th round pick, the running back out of North Carolina State, the 5th round pick in 2018. People like our main man, Wes Hickok, who's a regular contributor and viewer of our podcast. He's a great friend of this show and many other shows. He does not like Jalen Samuels. He is ready to move on from him. So many other people are also ready to move on from Jalen Samuels. And I'm not saying that those people are wrong. What I'm saying is, I mean, he's a 5th round pick. What really did you expect from him coming into the NFL 2 years ago? And because we're in the digital media age, you expected more than maybe past 5th round picks, right? I mean, that's just the time we're in. The NFL is a 24/7, 365 day a year enterprise, right? I mean, there's no real off season for the NFL anymore. I mean, the fans are most hardcore fans are engaged with all things NFL all year round. So, and the Steelers are they don't help with this kind of thing, because no matter what they do, as far as no matter who they draft and what round they draft a player in, they hype them up big time immediately on their Facebook page or on Twitter. You have the fancy highlights right away and the music in the background, and this guy looks tremendous. And because so many people are just crazy about football, there are all these blogs and podcasts, and you have various articles talking about these guys. A couple of years ago, it was Yeah, Samuels was considered a very versatile player coming out of North Carolina State. He could play running back, the H-back position, tight end. He was considered had the potential to be a great weapon out of the back, catching the ball out of the backfield, that kind of thing. So people were excited about him, and there were plenty of articles written. There were film breakdowns. People were asking. People were writing articles like how Jalen Samuels his versatility could really help the Steelers offense in 2018, right? And there's plenty of guys that people place those expectations on coming out of college. Plenty of mid to lower round draft picks and undrafted free agents. Again, it's the time that we're in. I mean, we not just know about them, but we learn about who their position coach was in college and how that guy may have been a coordinator at another school years earlier, and how he ran a system that was similar to Pittsburgh's, and how because of that they link that together and say that that this guy, this new draft pick, this even if it's a lower round pick or an undrafted free agent, they try to kind of put the pieces together and say that this guy is going to really be could really add a lot to the Steelers offense. And as it turns out, after you watch the guy for a year or two, you realize that, hey, he's a 5th round pick for a reason, or he's a 6th round pick for a reason, or he was an undrafted free agent for a reason, right? And Samuels, he had a pretty promising rookie year, right? He rushed for he averaged 4.6 yards per carry, 256 yards, but he really was a valuable asset for them later in the year when James Conner was hurt. And there was that game against the Patriots late in the year at Heinz Field where I think he rushed for 142 yards. So there was a lot to be excited about heading into 2019. But he was Samuels was a pretty big factor for them last year as far as in the offense. But he didn't do a whole heck of a lot. He had 480 yards from scrimmage total. He only averaged 2.7 yards a carry on the ground. And he did have 47 receptions, but for only 305 yards. And a lot of those receptions were kind of pseudo handoffs out of the Wildcat, that kind of thing. So it wasn't a great year for him last year as far as production. But it wasn't a great year for a lot of players on that offense, really. I mean, the offense struggled the entire year. It was mainly because of the quarterback play. So a lot of people are all ready to move on from Jalen Samuels. A lot of people think he should be cut or he should be traded, which, I mean, if you think he could be cut, why would anybody want to trade for him? That kind of thing. And obviously Anthony McFarland, the 4th round pick out of Maryland, he's safe, and people were excited about him, because he his highlights out of Maryland are pretty exciting, and he has great speed, and they just signed this veteran running back named Wendell Smallwood. I'm not expecting a whole lot from him, but the point is, if the Steelers don't go 4 deep at running back, which they may not with Derek Watt and his versatility at fullback, he's also capable of doing a lot of the things that Samuels can do, and catching the ball out of the backfield, playing the H-back spot. So there are a lot of people that are ready to move on from Samuels. But what are the chances of a guy like McFarland really having a great career? I mean, we want to believe that he could have a great career, but we were saying the same things about Samuels 2 years ago. So, these guys are drafted where they are usually for a reason. Most of the time, these coaches, these scouts, these GMs, they don't miss. So they don't miss very often, I should say. So, I guess my question is, why would you move on from Samuels with 2 years left on his rookie deal? He knows the system now. He's been in the system for 2 years. He's carved out a little bit of a niche for himself in the offense. He's proven to be a guy that you can go to in a pinch. He can start at running back if you need him to. And last year wasn't a great example of that, but with Ben back under center and things opening up more with the offense, you would assume in 2020, it'll probably be a little easier for him to be a more valuable weapon in the offense this year. So my advice is don't be so quick to give up on Jalen Samuels. Not that he's ever going. I don't think he's ever going to be a great player, but he has a good chance to be a valuable role player for them. Along the lines of so many guys like when I was growing up, they drafted a running back out of Miami named Warren Williams. He was never great, but he played here for like a half a decade, and he did okay for himself. Usually, guys that are drafted in the 5th, 6th, 7th round, undrafted free agents, those are the kind of careers that they have. And again, we hype them up so much now because we know everything about everybody. I mean, the second these guys are drafted or signed, even the undrafted free agents, they're immediately followed on Twitter by 20,000 people. So we know everything about them. We just eat up every little morsel of information on them, every article written about them. Again, everybody from Tunch Ilkin to Merrill Hodge, all the way down to your average blogger is doing film breakdowns on these guys, and so the expectations are probably higher than they should be. So I don't see. First of all, last year they kept 4 running backs. They kept obviously Connor, Benny Snow was a 4th round pick, Samuels, and Trey Edmonds. So I don't see any reason why they would only go with 3 this year, other than, as I said earlier, maybe Watt can do a lot of the things that Samuels is capable of doing. So, but if they do decide to keep 4, which I think they're going to, I don't see any reason why Samuels is going to be cut. That's just my opinion. So that's the third topic. And I have one more topic I wanted to discuss before I open things up to questions. And that's the idea of actually, no, that's not true. I have 2 more topics I want to discuss. I'm sorry, I'm all over the place. But my favorite topic that I couldn't wait to get to, and that's another topic that has to do with playoff positioning. And something I've always been fascinated about, and that's playoff seeds. And I've been beating this drum off and on for like 10 years. And that's that I think the NFL should seed the playoffs based on record and not on whether or not you win. You shouldn't automatically get a higher seed or one of the top 4 seeds because you win your division. That's kind of the system that we've had in place since 1990, when which was the last time that the NFL expanded its playoff field. It went from 5 teams in each conference to 6. And if you won your division, if you won the top 3 seeds, you automatically got a home game. Now, if you're 1 and 2, you got a bye. If you were the 3rd seed, you had to play an extra game, but at least that first game was at home. And then, of course, in 2002, they had realignment, and they had expansion. And they added another division in each conference. The AFC North was formed. The AFC South was formed, that kind of thing. So it went from it was still the same basic format, but the top 4 seeds went to the 4 division winners in each conference. And then, of course, the 5th and 6th seeds went to the straight up wildcard teams. So this is ever since since 1990, if you won your division, you automatically got to play at home in the first round. Even if you had a 8-8 record or 9-7, or in 2010 when the Seahawks finished 7-9, they won the NFC West. They got to host the defending Super Bowl champion Saints at home, and of course they beat them. Of course, leave it to the Saints, a pretty downtrodden, sad sack franchise for the most part up to that point. They finally, or at least up until the 90s, they finally win the Super Bowl, and it's great. And then they defend their crown by losing to the first team in the modern era to make the playoffs with a losing record. So, I've been fascinated with the idea of changing that up since 2010. And of course, the following year, as I mentioned earlier in the show, the Steelers, who just missed out on the AFC North and the number 2 seed, they had to go and play the 8-8 Broncos in Denver, who won the AFC West and were the 4th seed. So I've been fascinating with that topic ever since then. A lot of people, when you say that they should seed the playoffs based on record and not on whether or not you win your division, they say, well, what's the point of having a division if you don't get to play a home game? Well, whoever said a division winner playing at home was written in stone? Like whoever, like, since when is that a ironclad thing? Because for many years it wasn't like that. Back in the early 70s, right after realignment, there were no seeds. The home teams were rotated based on division year after year like for those first few years after the realignment. And of course, the most famous example of that was in 1972 when the undefeated Dolphins had to come to Three River Stadium for the AFC Championship game. And of course, the Dolphins prevailed. But could you imagine that being 16-0 at that, which is what they were at that point, or 15-0, I guess, at that point, and having to go and play a team that lost 3 times during the regular season, having to play at their place for the right to go to the Super Bowl. So there were no seeds back then, and they rotated. And then, of course, by the mid-70s, by 1975, they finally had a seeding system in place. But the number 3 seed in each conference, which was a division winner, never opened up at home. And in fact, I went and did some research. The number 3 seed from 1975 all the way up through 1989 rarely played any home games in the playoffs. You would think that every now and then that would have happened, but it rarely did. So if you were a number 3 seed, even if you won your division, which back then that's what a number 3 seed was, a division winner, you weren't guaranteed any home games. And this happened for close to 15 years. That was the case for close to 15 years. In fact, the Steelers in 1984, they were 9-7, and they were the 3 seed. And there were 2 teams that finished with better records than them, the Seahawks and the Raiders, but neither one of those teams, believe it or not, won the AFC West. They both finished, the Broncos finished 13-3, the Seahawks were 12-4, and the Raiders were 11-5. And the Seahawks and the Raiders had to play in the wild card round because back then there was only one wild card game. There were only 5 seeds, and then the winner of that game, they played it was the Seahawks, and they played the Dolphins, and then the Steelers played the Broncos. So there were conversely though, I guess if you were from 1978, once they did add an extra wild card team through 89, if you did win your division, no matter what record you had, you got a week off, which is a big leg up, as we all know. So my point is, the NFL has been all over the place throughout its history with its playoff format. So it wouldn't be the end of the world, I don't think, if they changed it around where they had, like, even if you didn't win your division, you somehow were the 2nd or 3rd seed in your conference, as opposed to being no better than 5th because that's just how they do it, right? I mean, like people always say, what's the point of having a division if you don't get a home game? Well, the point is you go to the playoffs, right? I mean, look at the NCAA basketball tournament. Just because you win your conference, like some mid-major conference, you don't get a higher seed in the tournament. Like, you're not seeded higher than some at-large team from the ACC or the Big Ten. In the vast majority of the cases, it's the other way around. You're the lower seed. So why can't it be that way in the playoffs? And if it was that way in the playoffs, for example, that 84 Steeler team would have been the 5th seed, and they would have had to play the Raiders in the wild card round. Would they have called it the wild card round if there's a division winner in there? I don't know, but they could have called it round 1, and then of course you go on from there. But in 2011, the famous Tebow game, the Steelers would have been the third seed, and of course the Broncos would have been the last seed, and they would have come to Heinz Field, and that might have made a big difference in the Steelers advancing in the playoffs. And it's not that I'm necessarily opposed to this the current system that again has been in place since 1990. In fact, I don't mind it at all, and I think the NFL likes it because it's always been a league that's been about parity, right? I mean, that's why there's a salary cap. That's why there's evenly distributed revenue, like the TV money is evenly distributed among all 32 teams. It likes it, and I think like that Broncos team, for example, in 2011, when they beat the Steelers, I think the NFL liked something like that because Tebow was everybody's darling back then, and of course. Tom Brady was Tom Brady, and he was like Darth Vader. So it was like Luke Skywalker going to play Darth Vader in the divisional round. So I don't know what the ratings were for that game, but I can imagine they were pretty high. I remember watching it with my girlfriend, and the game was awful, but I'm sure it garnered a lot of ratings. It was a primetime game on Saturday night, so I'm sure the NFL loved that. The NFL loves things like that. But if I were to tweak the system, that's what I would do. I would seed teams based on record and not on whether or not they win the division. And yes, if you win the division, you should go to the playoffs. Otherwise, what would be the point of having a division if it doesn't mean anything? But it shouldn't guarantee a home game, especially like why should a 12-4 team have to go play an 8-8 team at their place in the playoffs? To me, I don't think that's necessarily fair. But it's probably not going to change, but if I were the commissioner, I might look into changing that. So that's the next topic, or that's the third topic, or the fourth topic, whatever. Let's see, it's 1, 2, 3. The third topic. And now, my final topic I wanted to cover before I take some questions, and that's the idea of being optimistic in the off season, and why I'm almost always optimistic, and why we should all be optimistic. And I just, there's always a time and place for negativity, and that's usually during the regular season because you're reacting to what just happened, right? Like I don't understand why people get mad at you when you write a critical article about the Steelers after they just lost an ugly game. Of course, if you're a writer, or if you're just a fan that's commenting, you're gonna be critical because they just crap the bed, right? So why wouldn't you react to that? But the off season should be all about positivity, and I know a lot of people who just never act happy, and they never seem like they're enjoying themselves as fans. So my question is, why are you even a fan if you're going to spend the entire off season just saying they need to fire Tomlin, they need to fire Butler, they need to fire Colbert, they need to fire whomever, right? They need to get rid of Fichtner, and like they're saying this all the way up through August. They're asking you that question. So you're trying to tell me that Mike Tomlin is the right guy to be the head coach of this team? I'm like, it's August. You need to stop worrying about that stuff and concentrating on the season. They're not gonna fire Mike Tomlin right now. You need to get off that bandwagon. I mean, some of these people, it's all they do. It's like they'll do Photoshop where they'll dress Tomlin as a clown and Colbert as a clown and Art Rooney as a clown. And it's like some weird political propaganda from 1884. And it's like all they do is harp on, these three clowns need to go. It's like it's like the only thing that they talk about the entire off season. Whereas to me, the off season, as I mentioned in the previous segment when I was talking about guys like Jalen Samuels and how fans are so excited about even the undrafted free agents. I mean, the off season is about allowing yourself to be optimistic, allowing yourself to be hopeful, allowing yourself to like maybe Anthony McFarland. I said earlier he could be just a role player, but maybe he's like the greatest running back ever. That's what the off season's really supposed to be for, right? I mean, I'm a Pirates fan, and they're just absolutely horrible right now. And they have been pretty mediocre the last few years, but especially this year, that not a whole lot was expected of them. And then of course you had the COVID thing, which cut down the regular season to 60 games. But even I, as recently as a few weeks ago, was excited about the Pirates starting their season because you're just as the saying goes, hope springs eternal, right? So I just you have the draft, you have free agency, you have the schedule to look forward to usually in most years, when there's obviously most years that are normal when you're allowed to attend games. So there's all like, it's all about being positive, but some people just won't even allow themselves to be positive during the off season. And I just think that's the time that we should always be positive. Like I always get called a homer in the off season because that's what the off season is all about. It's about being a homer. Even the beat writers, they're usually pretty optimistic about when they're asked about the team in the off season, right? They're not like trashing them. They're not saying that they're gonna, because who wants to cover a team that's supposed to be, that they think is going to be bad, right? So that's the final topic I wanted to cover, and now I will take some questions. So fire away, and I'll scroll back and see if I can find some old questions here. Here's one from Ezra. It's not really a question; it's a comment. If I can get it up there. I know I'm going to sound crazy, but I don't like when we play at home in the playoffs. I get more nervous watching us at home than on the road. Well, I think that's more the probably the feeling that you have. They more is expected of them when they play at home, because obviously they're the higher seed, and in most cases, when you're the higher seed, you have the better record, and of course you have 65,000 people screaming, and most of them are Steeler fans. The vast majority of them are Steeler fans, and everybody is expecting to leave there with a win, right? So that's probably why. But if I had my choice, with the exception of this year, because there probably won't be fans in the stands, if I had my choice, I would always want to see them playing at home. I think it's, as I said, the home team, whether you believe in the official bias thing or not, the home team, it's proven throughout all sports that the home team generally has a much better shot of winning. So I'd much rather see them. I'm nervous for the playoffs, whether it's home, on the road, fans, no fans, although I guess I'll find out if I'm going to be really nervous watching a game without fans in the stands, but I'm sure I will be, because if they do make the playoffs, because there's always a lot at stake in the playoffs, of course. So it'll be interesting to see how that all plays out. Let's see. Here's one from Dave Shipley. Let's see what he has to say. Year 2 is the biggest jump. Which rookie or rookies make the biggest jump? Why can I not super chat? Well, that question, Dave, I'm not so sure about that part of it. Although I do appreciate the fact that you wanted to super chat, but I don't know why you weren't able to do that. If I had to say which rookies are going to make the biggest jump, well, I think it's obvious. I think Devin Bush. He played. He had a pretty decent rookie year last year. I think he gets lost in the shuffle. Speaking of guys getting lost in the shuffle, although when it comes to Bush, it's not because people are forgetting about him or think he doesn't have what it takes. It's because of guys like T.J. Watt and Mika Fitzpatrick. So it's easy to forget about a guy like Devin Bush, but based on his abilities and what they did to get him and how he played last year in his rookie year, I fully expect Devin Bush to make a huge jump this year. And number 2 would obviously be Deontay Johnson, which was the second guy they picked last year. So I guess it's no surprise that I'm picking him as another guy to have a huge jump, because he did a great job last year with Mason Rudolph and Devlin Hodges. So imagine what he could do with Big Ben, right? And as you said, the first or second year is when guys make the biggest jump, and even a guy like James Washington made a huge jump last year. So I fully expect both Bush and Johnson to really step it up this year. Here's one from, I can't really, Portna Kunbai. Hopefully I'm saying that name right, but if the Steelers took Lamar Jackson instead of Terrell Edmonds, how would Randy Fichtner have used Lamar to date? I don't know. That's a good question. I doubt it would have been. He probably wouldn't have. He probably would still be on the bench, because I don't think Ben likes to come out of the game. He certainly has more cachet than a Joe Flacco, right? He's certainly a bigger presence in the Steelers organization. I think he garners more respect than Joe Flacco ever did with Baltimore. And I doubt we would have seen Jackson all that much. I think he would have been biding his time until Ben retired, or maybe after the injury last year, maybe they move on from Ben and see what they have. Maybe they see what they have in Lamar Jackson in practice and training camp for over his first couple of years, and they decide, this guy might be our a true heir apparent, and maybe they move on from Ben. Maybe they after his injury last year, maybe they move on from him and Lamar's your guy starting right now. Who knows? But I doubt he would have gotten much playing time, simply because, as I said, Ben doesn't like to come out of the game all that often. So that's those are my thoughts on that. Let's see what else we have here. Here's one from Andrew Wilbar. Are you worried about week 1 versus the Giants? We tend to get off to slow starts and play down to easy teams. Plus, Joe Judge is coming from New England, who prides themselves on preparation. Thoughts? Am I worried about the Giants? I mean, to me, it's a huge wild card because there will be no preseason games. There will, the information we get from training camp will be more limited than in previous years, simply because fans won't be allowed to attend, and the reporter pool will be smaller than usual. Although the Steelers, I read on their site, thanks to Jeff Hartman, who posted a link, that we'll be able to see live look-ins at training camp on a daily basis, and of course there'll be your usual updates. Am I worried about them playing down to competition? No, because I'm not. There won't be any fans in the stands. I mean, that's already official with the Giants. They're not going to have fans in the stands, at least for week 1. So I think that takes that factor out of the game. I think, if they're prepared, if the Steelers are prepared, if Ben has been of old, and if the defense picks up where it left off last year, then no, I think I'm not worried about that game. As I said to Brian on Monday, that game feels like a win. I could be wrong. Who knows? Maybe I'm completely overestimating Ben at the age of 38, and maybe I'm overestimating how good these skill position players could be, simply because Ben's back. I don't know, but I'm not anticipating a loss. I feel good about that game. Let's see. Well, here's one from Young Boy who says Lamar Jackson would be playing running back. I doubt that. I think if you draft a quarterback in round 1, you're not going to play him at running back. That's just those guys are far too valuable for that. And I don't think he would accept that anyway. I mean, who knows? I'm sure he'd do whatever he could to help the team win, but I don't know why you would draft a quarterback and then expose him to. I realize he runs a lot as a quarterback as it is, but a running back's a whole different ball game when it comes to the beating that you take. And Lamar Jackson doesn't run 30, 40 times a game, so I don't think he would be playing running back. I think he'd still be on the bench because, unless they decide to move on from Ben, he would still be on the bench. So that's pretty much all I have for today. I'll just leave you with one last thing, and that's SB Nation recently updated its comments section. It was using the same format for close to a decade, and it finally updated its software. And there are a lot of people that are angry about that. And change is never easy, but my advice would be to just to stick with it. And a lot of people have said, I'm leaving this site, never coming back. But, I've been around for 10 years. And I remember 2012, the entire SB Nation interface changed. And people were mad about that. And they were afraid the community would go away. And the site, within a few years, it was more popular than ever. I think change is usually a good thing. It's not always a good thing, but usually at the end of the day, it is a good thing. And my advice would be just to stick it out. There are some bugs that they have to work out, but they're going to work it out. I mean, they don't want to lose people. They want people to enjoy the community aspect of SB Nation. Behind the Steel Curtain is one of the biggest communities on the network. So they're not going to want people to leave, right? They're going to want them to keep coming back, and they're going to want that site to be as popular as it's ever been. So it doesn't seem that bad. Like I find it easier to download. I find it easier to comment. It's just that they have a few kinks to work out, and I think they will. So that's my last thing for today. And I thank you all for joining me as always. And I'll see you on Monday with Steelers Q&A with Brian Anthony Davis. So everybody have a great weekend.